Therapy was a big part of how I turned my life around over 19 years in prison. It's the reason that I went and got a bachelor's in psychology, because I wanted to understand like what had happened to me. How did I get so far gone? How did I get so lost and end up in this crazy feral state where I caused so much harm? And then how could I get better? Like what could I do to improve my life or improve my experience? And then I started looking at the people around me, like what had happened to them that they were acting in this way, that they were stuck in this place, and how could we help them, elevate their position, elevate their lives? So that was really my focus. And I was really fortunate because I was able to work with therapists inside, those employed by DOC, as well as call on the phone and talk to a Gestalt therapist for years. So my experience was, I was gonna try everything because that was really my motto. I'll try it, and if it works, I'll keep it. If it's not, I'll just throw it away. So I did talk therapy and cognitive behavioral therapy and DBT, and I'm not a big fan of cognitive behavioral therapy. I think it works for some people who don't have any element of trauma in their life, or trauma isn't dominant in their life. But for the majority of people in prison, it actually could end up causing more problems or making things worse. Whereas dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT, I found to be incredibly vital. It's essentially these life skills, emotional regulation, distress tolerance, interpersonal effectiveness, mindfulness, and we're learning to have a better relationship with ourselves and then with the people around us. And it was so fundamentally different than just saying, oh, just change your thoughts. Like that's all we need to do. That it allowed me to feel like I was making a difference in my life and making a difference in the lives of those around me. And I actually started DBT on a whim. I was in a long distance relationship with a woman who was told by her therapist that she needed to learn DBT. So we started doing this workbook together, and she was really resistant, but I was excited. I was like, man, this is awesome. Like, I love this. I ended up teaching DBT modules when I was a mentor in the mental health program. I found it incredibly helpful. There were a couple other ones like ACT, which has a good model because it's based around values and who you want to be. And there are great therapeutic things out there. Gestalt is amazing. But what I found after getting out that has both kind of completely blown up my world and my presuppositions, but also allowed me to have the most fundamental kind of healing is IFS. So IFS is called Internal Family Systems. And it sounded crazy the first time I heard about it. I didn't really know what to think about it, but it started to make sense over time, and it's really made sense as I've worked with therapists. So Internal Family Systems basically says we have different parts inside of us. And if you want to read about this, I would highly recommend it. The guy's name is Richard Schwartz. He wrote a book called No Bad Parts, which is a great introduction. There are also some kind of like textbooks or like self-therapy books that I find really good, but his is the main introduction. But basically the idea is that we have parts, and these parts of us were spun off by trauma or as a response to things, but it's the reason we say, hey, part of me wants to go do this, but part of me doesn't. We're not one cohesive kind of like single mind, because we're like, why would I do that? That doesn't even make any sense, because we have these different parts or these different impulses or these different kind of defense mechanisms or reactions, and also these different pains and these different vulnerabilities. So when I started working with an IFS therapist, I didn't know what to expect. I said, this feels kind of hokey. And I would regularly say that. I would say, hey, this feels really hokey. Like a part of me doesn't think this makes any sense. And she would say, yeah, that's really natural. Like a part of you would think that, as long as you're willing to be open to the other parts that may not think that. And this past week, I had a session where she was just having me do something kind of like not verbal, like not this conversation, because I was feeling really triggered and really uncomfortable. And I just started sobbing, like deep from the core of my body, like body shaking, sobbing. And it terrified me at the time. And I wanted to stop and I wanted to resist. But some sense of like kind of peace and trust allowed me to go through that. What I found was when I was done, I felt so much better. And I asked her, because I had this like really analytical mind from traditional psychology, like, well, what was that about? Or what memory was that tied to? Or what do you think that is? And she was like, Jesse, it's okay to just feel sometimes. Like sometimes those feelings just need to come out. They've been trapped. And that's another book, The Body Keeps a Score. All these books are on my Linktree, by the way, under Books That Changed My Life, if you're interested. Amazing book, and it talks about how we keep trauma and we keep pain in our bodies, and it needs to be released. And all the cognitive work in the world is, can be great, but doesn't necessarily tap into that. And that was one of those experiences, that like deep somatic pain and trauma coming out, and how good it felt to just allow it to come out and not try to control it, not try to explain it, not needing to have some kind of like cognitive understanding. It was amazingly powerful, and that's been my experience with IFS. And I highly recommend it, because I've actually run into a couple people lately who've talked about how much it's changed their lives, or how much the introduction of these ideas has allowed themselves to be more kind to themselves or more compassionate. Because it's really easy, especially in the realm of therapy, to beat ourselves up. Because either we don't want to tell the truth, we don't want to admit the things we've done or the things we thought or the things we think today, or we judge ourselves when we do that. When we have some terrible thought, we're like, oh, I'm a terrible person. No, it's okay. Like, we can't control our thoughts. We can't control like the impulses or the ideas in our mind, but we can control whether we act on them. And the more we accept ourselves, the more we say, hey, I understand what's going on here. Like, I see this and I validate this, the more it loses its power over us. And it's actually when people try to control with this tight fist, like, I'm not going to do that, or I'm not going to think that, or I'm not going to feel that it just builds and builds until it erupts in these destructive impulses. I've seen that so clearly firsthand in my life. That was what my crimes were about. That was what my anger was about. That was what my self-pity was about, is not acknowledging and not validating the things I've been through and the emotions I've had and the ideas I've had. And the more I've done that, the more I've been able to be at peace with myself. And by being at peace with myself, I'm not as reactive towards other people. I'm not as reactive towards the world. I'm able to engage in a meaningful way, and I'm able to feel this sense of peace and calm. And it doesn't mean it's easy. Like, going through the breakup, the grief has been horrible. I mean, I've laid on the floor and sobbed over that. I've had anger, I've had frustration, I've had doubt, I've had, self-hatred, I've had all those things. But rather than judging them or saying they're right or wrong or what they're connected to, I just feel them. I allow them to work their way through me, and I realize that there's a need there. It's expressing itself through that emotion. Either that need isn't being met or that need is trying to tell me something. When I allow that to express, I can hear what's behind it. I can hear that. It's the same reason like this morning when I got all these nasty messages last night. I'm not mad that you're mad at me. I'm not mad that you judge me. I'm not mad that you hate me. I see the pain in you. I see that expressing itself. Because you and I don't know each other. The people that are writing these messages are strangers on the internet, but they're hurting so bad that they need to lash out and they need to hurt somebody else. So that doesn't bother me. Whereas when I'm in my reactive state or when I'm in my kind of like self-judgmental state, I would take it personally, or I would argue, or I would go back and forth. But when I'm in this balanced state, I can see it's just pain expressing itself. And I don't have to continue to pass that on. I don't have to argue back with them, or I don't have to pass that pain on to the next generation, to the next person in line. I can just say, hey, I see you hurting. Like, what can I do? Or how can I help? Or, hey, I really hope you get a hug. Because another thing, that's one of the first things I tied into with the somatic stuff, was it getting a hug. Physical contact, safety, security are so vital. And it's happened. It's been times where I've been triggered, been angry, I've been sad. Someone has just put their arms around me and hugged me, and it has just released all that tension, all that defensiveness. It just drains away. And it's really changed the way I understand, relationships and encouragement and support. And I want to be that person to other people. It's not always that easy, but we're always working on it. But again, it's about connection, it's about therapy, it's about honesty, it's about loving ourselves so that we can love other people. And I do, it's this journey. There's no like easy answer. It doesn't just end tomorrow. We don't go to therapy for a week and everything's okay. We just kind of work through this muck, and we work through these years of trauma and years of habits and years of struggle. And day by day, I see a little bit more light, or I feel a little bit more peace, and some new challenge will come up and I'll be totally destabilized, and I'll work through it some more. Because I can feel myself day by day becoming more and more the person that I want to be, and responding to pain when I feel pain in a way that I feel is in line with my values, or responding to negativity, or responding to joy even. I don't have to go out and celebrate and do something else, and I can if I want to, but it's like I'm not compulsive. I'm not in that place where I'm being driven by my past. I'm instead able to experience the daily experience, and I'm really grateful for that.